What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. Okay, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for, what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? I've got one of those guests that did all that, and she's here to talk about it. And I got to tell you, I was on LinkedIn, and somebody had shared and reposted on Elizabeth, and I started digging deeper, and I thought, oh, wow, this sounds really interesting. I want to know more about this. I reached out to Elizabeth. We got on the phone. We talked. I thought, I'd just love to have you on the show. I want to give you just a little background on Elizabeth here. She was incarcerated at the age of 17. She was sentenced to life, de facto 55-year sentence for a non-lethal first-time offense. After serving nearly 23 years, she was granted juvenile parole in 2023. We're in 2024. Wasn't too long ago. While incarcerated, Elizabeth co-founded a soft health initiative called Stop, Drop, and Yoga, as well as the Voice Project, which became an intensive trauma-informed writing workshop and acting program. Ultimately, she founded the Hope Team, which continues to be an ever-evolving partnership between the DOC medical, security staff, and justice-impacted individuals that encourages community-based healthcare practices and policy. Wow. Wow, oh wow, that sounds like a lot. I can't wait to jump into all that. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car. Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you, negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Okay, Elizabeth, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Brent. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we were just talking about before we got on here that you haven't, 23 years in prison. Probably driving cars wasn't something you were doing a lot of.
I'm gonna sponsor because I can't even imagine going on a car lot. It sounds like going to
There's a lot of choices.
Yeah. I've only been home around 6 months, so it's kind of been a tailspin about how many things have happened so fast. It's just one day at a time, right?
One day at a time. And you're so busy, I think that probably helps through reentry because, reentry, when you get out of prison, it feels like just you're jumping in a moving car and you're trying to catch up with everybody. But I want to go back a little bit because everything happened to you, Elizabeth, at such an early age, at 17 years old.
Yeah.
Take us back to Elizabeth's world growing up. What were you doing as a kid growing up? What was your life like?
So I had never been in trouble before, but I had been taken and removed out of my home multiple times. Families are complicated. They continue to be complicated.
Sure.
I started really young, dabbling with drugs, living the street life. That ultimately led me to trying to make it on my own at a very young age and working towards emancipation. And ultimately at 17, I thought I was going to a hotel party.
Well, did you have siblings? Like Elizabeth, were you? Yeah.
So I have a sister. Her name is Dory. And I have an older brother named David.
Okay.
So
you were the middle?
I am the middle child.
Yeah.
But David wasn't in my life until I was 9, and he was about 15 at the time. And he's a half sibling. He lives in Massachusetts. And my younger sister, Dory, we are not in communication right now because incarceration rips families apart. also the life prior to incarceration was not healthy or functional. And sometimes people deal with things in different ways. And I can't do anything but respect that.
Yeah.
You know, I totally understand that. I am in communication with my birth family now, and I actually live out here in Washington State to get to know them. And it's been a very healing process for me. But that didn't happen until the latter half of my incarceration.
Wow.
So growing up, that wasn't an option, really. Yeah.
So was it like, because I mean, it sounds like everything moved so fast for you as a kid with like school and everything. Were you, what was that experience like for you as you, I mean, because everything stopped obviously in your nightmare was in 17 years old. That's like a junior in high school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I went to 5 different elementary schools, 3 different middle schools in 2 years in 3 states. And I was kicked out of high school in my 9th grade year and put into an alternative school system.
Yeah.
That allows you to kind of work while you go to school. When I entered and then I ultimately dropped out in my 11th, 12th year. And then I was incarcerated around 6 months later. When I finally was tested to see my competency level on the inside in a prison in Virginia, the Flavanna Correctional Center for Women, I tested at a 5th grade level.
Wow.
So they passed me through all the way through.
Yeah.
Diploma.
Yeah.
But I could barely read and write. And I did know math because I knew how to count money. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I am graduating with my bachelor's now in May, and I have multiple associate's degrees and multiple vocational degrees. So it's kind of like, I don't know.
You came to it later.
Right?
Yeah.
Like where it was from, but it's also hard not to forget.
Yeah, because it's part of you. I mean, you know, and I think that, you know, the formation at an early age of your experiences, you know, trying to get through growing up as a kid's hard anyway, but you know, sounding like,
no, I'm around 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Or 17 to 20-year-olds that are in school at the University of Puget Sound. And I was that kid, you know, with those opportunities, but I was that kid. And it's like, sometimes they tell me their stories about what they're doing now. And I'm like, stop.
Be careful.
What car you choose to get into. But, cause you just never know, you know, like I had the opportunity to walk away from that event that changed my life later that night, but I did not know it was going to happen ahead of time. And so there's choices you make when you're a child that are much different than when you're an adult. And I am glad that the justice system is starting to recognize children for children.
Yeah.
And see them that way. And I am very thankful for my freedom. And even if it's very much new and kind of a mind-blowing experience.
And I think the law was changed like in 2012, I think, or something along those lines, where you could, a teenager that was sentenced to basically life without parole, they changed that. And so many people, I've interviewed 3 or 4 people that they got out because of that, and it changed, you know, obviously the life. But so
that happened for the federal system. The state system didn't. Some of the state systems,
right? Because it has to go state by state, right?
And so I was a state case, not a federal case.
Okay.
So luckily, Virginia has reversed their ideology of sentencing children to life without, and have a parole system now for juveniles specifically. So after serving 20 years, you're then eligible in the state of Virginia for parole. It's still a slim chance for women who are juveniles to make parole in the state of Virginia. My lawyer told me after I made parole, thank God, that it was a 0.001% chance of making it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, lead us into what happened. What that nightmare that led you to a 17-year-old getting sentenced the way you got sentenced. What happened?
So I was working at Michael's Arts and Crafts part-time as like a floor manager. The bane of my existence then was having to reorganize the fake flowers. We were closing out the till, and my co-defendant showed up and said, there's a hotel party. Do you want to go?
Okay.
And I said, sure. I was working as a stripper. I was dancing part-time at the time. And I was like, sure. We ended up getting in the car of my boss at the time. And I'm not going to say her name here to protect her privacy. But she drove us to the back of the hotel. And at that point in time, it became a carjacking. And so her car was taken forcefully. And yeah, the end of that night, we were in a cop car. So yeah. I can't change what happened then. Do I wish that I had made different choices then? Yes, ultimately I do. And I live with a very in-depth recollection of that night every single day. But I also think it's my responsibility now to then give back to the community, because what we do ultimately choose to do does affect others. It affects me and it affects my family and life. But at the same time, like, her life was drastically altered, and then the community's is drastically altered as well by a choice that I made.
Yeah.
And I think it's like very tempting to say, oh, my life was horrible and I didn't have the skills to not say no. Even if that's true, there was still a choice made.
Yeah.
I don't agree that I should have received the sentence that I received, but I do agree that I should have been incarcerated, which might be a different point of view for some people, because there should be accountability, you know?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, I guess it's the punishment to fit the crime. And there's a lot of different things to fall into, you know, deep discussion about a 17-year-old kid and where they are in their life at that point and what that means. And choices that you would make at 17 might not be the same choices you make at 25 or 45 or 75. But to take their whole life, you know, so that night that when it happened, what all happened after that? Like, as you got put into the back of that police car, what happened?
So I was interrogated for about 12 hours without representation. I was coming down off the drugs that I was on, so I was sick. After that, I was taken to a juvenile detention center. We're going to condense a few months into a sentence.
Yeah.
Or a couple of sentences. I met with my public defender one time prior to court. I pled guilty to what I thought was juvenile life, which, for people who don't know, in the state of Virginia means that you're incarcerated until the age of 21 in a juvenile facility, and then you're reviewed for release, and they can hold you till you're 23 at the max.
So that's what you thought. That's what you thought you were doing.
Yeah.
That was your. Was that told to you by your attorney, or what? What was the?
What was told to me by my attorney? I would have pled guilty regardless if that deal was on the table or not, because the victim in this case was my friend, and I was guilty. And at that point in time, I just knew that that was the right thing to do. I don't know how to explain that. I just knew that I was guilty and that I needed to plead guilty because I was guilty. For being there, for not walking away, and for not getting help. My court-appointed lawyer, this is where your like socioeconomical class comes into play here.
Yeah.
My court-appointed lawyer spent a total of 5 minutes with me before we were in court and 5 minutes with me inside of court itself.
That was it.
That was it. When I pled guilty, the judge himself is deceased now. His name was Henry Hudson, and they used to call him Hingham High Hudson. He has passed away. I was his last case before he moved up the circuit. I'm not saying that influenced his decision. It would have influenced mine. Just being honest. But he took the time to explain to me what every charge was, because my lawyer had not. So he asked me, when you plead guilty, they ask you, do you know what this charge can carry? And then they say, and if you say yes, they say, well, what does it carry? And I guessed, right? So I didn't know. So I had like robbery and carjacking. and malicious wounding and robbery. And I said, I don't know, 5 years. I don't know, 10 years. And he said, no, someone should have explained this to you before you signed that paper. But since they didn't, I'm going to explain it now so it's on record.
Mm.
And he proceeded to explain to me that every single charge I had could be sentenced to some number, usually
The max number, yeah.
to life or to 20 or to whatnot. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then he said, in light of this, I'm going to refuse your plea deal and I'm going to give you 55 years. At that point, I didn't hear anything else.
I can't imagine, Elizabeth, what was going on. I mean, was it a blur that just said? I can't even imagine at your age hearing that, because you're not even, 17, 18 years old to say 55 is like that's incomprehensible. I mean, if I'm 57 years old, so somebody tells me 55 years, I know that basically that's my lifetime plus 2 years. You were exactly opposite, reverse of that.
Yeah. And I didn't even comprehend what was happening actually. I kind of just spaced out. And when I came back to like what was happening in the present moment, the judge had left the courtroom and he was called back in because they didn't know where to put me. They didn't know if I should go back to juvie. They didn't know if I was going to the adult jail or if I was going to go to isolation. Because at my age, if you're in the adult jail, they hold you in isolation. They did then. That's not the practice now, I don't think. I'm not 100% sure. But then if you were a juvenile and they were putting you into adult detention center, they would put you in isolation until you became an adult. So the judge came back in and said, no, she's going to prison. She's going to the adult center. Take her there. So they put me in isolation. I proceeded to stay in isolation for about 18 months.
Oh my gosh.
Some of that was due to my own behavior because I didn't want to leave after that.
When you say you were in isolation, were you were literally in a cell by yourself?
Yeah. And so this is before the new jail was built in Virginia. So it's the old jail is what they call it now. And I don't actually think they house women there at all anymore. So the jail part is a 6x5 cell with a cot and no mattress.
It's like a closet.
Mat.
Yeah.
Right?
You were in there for 18 months, like the size of a closet.
Yeah. Well, I was there for about 8 months and then they moved me to the prison itself, which was a little bit bigger room. Same idea. Yeah. And then I was put into receiving shortly after that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is just with everybody. And receiving's chaotic. It's probably the most chaotic place you'll be in your entire incarceration because everybody's new. And
so do you have any contact with the outside world while this is all transpiring in your young life?
So you're allowed to use the phone. Different places, it's different amount of times during the week. And that fluctuates depending on who the officer is and what the rule is at the time. On average, it's usually once a day or 3 times a week, depending on where you are. You get a shower every 3 days. And then they give you the option of going to recreation. In Virginia, I think it's 3 hours a week is the law. Sometimes you get a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, depending on the staff availability.
Is the recreation inside or outside?
So in segregation, it's outside and it's in what they call the dog cage. So if you've ever been to a pound, mm-hmm. like where you go pick up animals, mm-hmm. it is those exact same cages, except for they're a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. And they're in a concrete enclosed area as well. So you do get some fresh air, but there's no, other than if you look.
Nothing to look at. All right. No greenery, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first 15 months, the first 18 months were a doozy. I think part of me, it was like the first time I could relax though in my own life. So part of me, it was a relief to be there, which is horrible to say. A
relief in what way, Elizabeth? Like relief that you weren't fighting the fight on the outside, that you weren't in the drugs and that kind of relief?
Yeah. So, I got sober. I always knew that I had a meal, regardless if it wasn't the best meal. Mm-hmm. For me, I was a vegetarian, so it was beans 3 times a week. And in the jail, it was something called the veggie loaf. So they took all the leftover vegetables and they put them together in a blender, and then they baked it. So you got this thing that looked like a turd. And that's what you ate.
That was the veggie loaf.
The veggie loaf, yeah. And once you told them you were a vegetarian, you couldn't come off. But it's okay. So you could get commissary. I did not have funds at the time, so I did not get very much commissary. And if I did get any funds, it was more towards personal hygiene items, like soap and such. Yeah. The beginning was rough.
That sounds really rough. I mean, your entry as a young kid into an adult world sounds horrible, horrific. And
my co-defendant is also a female, and so she was in these same spaces with me, and she was treated differently because she was older, so she was in population.
Yeah. So you finally get notified that you're moving, and so where do they move you to?
So the Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women was the first move that I made from the Adult Detention Center in Fairfax County to there. And then there they come one morning and they say, bang, 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 pack up. As if you have anything to pack up. and they take you. And I went across the campus to receiving. And I was there for 3 months, and then they put you into general population, wherever you're going to go. So yeah, that's the beginning process of it. Later on, you can earn the ability to like live in like an honor unit, or you can learn the ability to live in like a long-termers unit. And then at one point in time, they also had a school unit because people who were in school were being targeted because not everybody had school. So it was like a safe unit for. There's also a re-entry building now. So
Elizabeth, when you finally got to where you were going to be in this women's prison, women's prison, how old would you have been? 18? So how were you received going in, being probably one of the youngest people in the prison?
So the officers, I'm not going to say his name, but there was one in particular who's like, oh, you think you're grown, we're going to treat you like you're grown. And so the mentality inside then was, oh, you think you're grown? Okay, then you can take harassment. You can take verbal altercations. This is pre-PREA era. So the sexual innuendo and or harassment or whatnot was still a very active thing. The prison I was in actually had people who had been released testify for PREA to be enacted in Congress. So that was an interesting experience. But mostly it was one of the two things. So staff-wise, it was either people who wanted to take care of me because I was a child and so young. And so they wanted to be
kind of mother you.
Mother or father. And then or it was people who were like, oh, you're so young, you need, spare the rod mentality. You need to be treated like you're a child and you're no good, and this is how we'll help you. And that old mentality that you can never change was very prevalent at the time that I was incarcerated. I think we've moved more to a growth model that people can change over their lifetime. But at that time, it was not that way. It was, you messed up once, you're going to be a mess up forever. And so you had these like dueling ideologies of who you are as a person. And then I was angry, right? I was a 17.
Well, yeah, no, that's the thing. I'm listening to you talk about this, and the reason why you're sitting here now is you didn't lose hope. But did you walk in that way? Because, that to me, it seems like it would have been so difficult to get out of your dark funk of, oh my God, I've just been sentenced to life, basically. Like, how did you work your way through that?
Well, it's a grieving process, and I think grief never really leaves us. There's still things that I mourn for now that I wish that I had as a child. And it's very surprising when grief comes up. You almost don't expect it, even now, almost 23 years later, I don't know. I had to do a lot of things to survive inside because I did not have finances. I did not have support at the beginning. And that perpetuated me getting in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I also felt like I had a lot to prove. So just keep safe. Then there's that element as well, that to keep safe, you have to
Protect yourself.
protect yourself, right? And that doesn't always look like protection on paper.
Right.
There was a point though that I met two women.
What security level would this have been?
Oh, maximum. So they put me directly into the maximum. So in Virginia, there's no super max for women. There's only a maximum multi-level, and it's considered the like medical unit, but I was in the max part.
You were in the max part.
And my age. So they use both as indicators if you are a threat to the system, and they classify you as such. So I wouldn't have been able to move until medium or minimum security until I had done 20 years.
That you've done 20 years.
Mm-hmm. So I wasn't moved to a lower custody until.
Because you did 23 years, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So it was right before I was. It was in 19, and they did an override to move me to a lower custody, and that was only because I was trying to transfer from that prison to Washington State to be near my biological family. Yeah.
Okay, so did you? It's so fascinating because how did this biological family that you started communicating with, did that start happening as you, like, how far were you into your sentence that you started getting a connection with your biological family?
So my father was in my life. My mother wasn't really in my life at that time. My father and my Nana started visiting first.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty early on.
Okay.
It was about 2003-ish.
Okay.
When I transferred to the adult prison. My mom and me started reconnecting on a more in-depth level when I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
And we actually are planning on going to Seattle this weekend and seeing a light show. And, we're actually having a really good time reconnecting in person here. I'm not going to say that it's always easiest. Family's complicated. It continues to be complicated. But it started slow and it was rocky. And there was a couple years there that we didn't speak. And then towards the end there, when both my grandmothers passed away, one after the other. And I think that kind of makes you reevaluate who's in your life and not in your life when you experience loss like that. That's not so, that life's finite, right? We don't have unlimited time to do everything and make amends. And so why don't we try to do that now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting ride.
Well, and so because obviously when you're in that type of situation where you're in a max, you're doing a lot of time, you have to have strategies to live. Like, what was your world like in a given day? And I'm sure it probably evolved because I know that you did different things as things went on and you started your own programs.
So at first I would wake up and you're automatically put into a job, either housekeeping or the kitchen. And so I worked in the kitchen and I was a cook / baker for a very, very long time. And I still love to cook and bake. Okay. My own kitchen for myself, but I still don't know portion control.
No, not when you were cooking for how many people?
1,800.
1,800 people. That's a lot of people.
So I'd get up and I'd go to work, usually on the midnight shift. And then I would come home and I got put into school a couple of years in. Yeah. And it was how to use business software, but it was how to use Word. So for those of you who are young listening to this, I was incarcerated in 2002. Facebook wasn't a thing until 2004 or 2006. Yeah. Okay. These things didn't exist. I had a pager.
No, that was 2007, I think, when the iPhone came out.
Yeah. So the first couple of years, it was like, okay, well, Word is starting to be a really big thing and everybody needs to know it in the community. So we should teach this. So it was just basic skills of Word and PowerPoint and that. But what that allowed me to do was that it allowed me to then be on the radar for the special education program that came in, and a woman named Gary Hayden, who was my special ed teacher and had me retested for learning disabilities at that time and then assigned under an IEP. So, and then proceeded to work with me for a year and a half to finish the first college class I ever did. And it was algebra, which is the worst thing to start.
No, I don't like algebra.
Either. But yeah, so it took a year and a half to do that. And then I worked for her as a tutor.
Okay.
On again, off again for the next 10 years.
So that was a good connection for you. It's almost like even more like a mentorship, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. And so actually I was just granted permission to talk to, I'm going to call her Miss Hayden, even though she tells me I can call her Jerry now. I was just granted permission to talk to Miss Hayden, and I'm currently setting up a webinar series for Ithaca S&R, which is, well, actually it's for JSTOR, which is a division of Ithaca S&R. And she's going to be on one of the panels talking about education and technology stressors within carceral situations. And the woman who was a tutor of hers and also my instructor is also going to be on it. And they are currently out as well and in a PhD program to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So it's like they taught together on the inside, and now they're going to be on this webinar, and they're both, well, Miss Hayden's always been out, but now Steph is also out. And so they're going to talk on this board that I get to put together about that experience, just about how it is to like teach on the inside and the frustrations that are there when you don't have access to technology, or you do, either way, and the different implications of what that is. So it's just like a full circle moment for me. I actually just got off the phone with my sponsor, Stacey Burnett. She's the senior manager of at Ithaca S&R. She used to work for JSTOR only, but now she's with Ithaca. And it's just kind of amazing to be able to be in a place where, like, at fifth grade education, and I go into this classroom as an angry, ornery woman, child, actually an angry, ornery child. And then she gave me her all, and she believed in me, and she was the first person to believe in me.
Yeah, no, I think you telling this story, I didn't know any of this in the research and looking at your story. I had no idea that you had, so that really was a big connection for you to almost give you hope.
Yeah, school. So, you don't know what you don't know. I think I've told you this before.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that there was a world beyond the streets or the dysfunction that I was living in. That's
all you knew.
Referral. I didn't even know that other people lived any other way than the way I was living. So when I started going to school, it was like we were reading these little mini short stories. Remember, I had fifth grade education, right?
Yeah.
So these little mini short stories to get like bump up. And they were stories about other countries. So I was like, oh, well, wait a minute, what is this? And so I got curious. I've always been a curious person, but this is the first time my curiosity was kind of encouraged. And so I would find something out about like Mulan, and then Jerry would take it upon herself to go find more information about that. And so it was like, that's how we engaged. And then also just identifying like what I needed to do to like be able to learn and feel empowered in that is just such a thing. And for me, it's being able to help somebody else learn.
Sure.
If I can talk to somebody else about what I'm learning, then it stays. And then it also helps them. And so it was really interesting that I find that out. But as I got more education, more doors opened. And so I am in a very privileged position because most people do not have access to education on the inside. At one point in time, there was only 36 people in an associate program out of 1,800 women. So I'm not the norm.
Right.
There's
small percentage. Yeah.
Very small percentage has access to education. And that was thanks to the Sunshine Foundation. I don't know if you guys know Sunshine Ladies, but Warren Buffett's sister started a nonprofit, and they donated money to for Puget Sound community. I'm not Puget Sound, Piedmont Community College, to one in Virginia.
For the associate degrees.
And so my first associate degree took me 10 years.
10 years.
So 10 years because of accessibility, because of funding, because of
but you stayed with it.
my own choices. Yeah. So education also in Virginia is tied to behavior. So if you get an infraction, no matter how small that infraction is, you lose your place in an education program. I don't know if that's changed now, but that was the policy when I was there.
Yeah.
You also often lose your job. So one infraction for, let's say, not standing up during count could cost you everything. And that's also a way that people are targeted in some ways if someone doesn't want you in school, right? Or wants the spot that you have, which perpetuated a school unit being built. So it's a complicated process inside. But for me, the two teachers that were the most instrumental in me and my behavior change were Gary Hayden, who was a special education teacher, high school GED, and Miss Nancy Archie, who was a print technologies and graphic design teacher. So Jerry was the first person who ever taught me that I could learn and I could be smart and I could be helpful and I was worth that time. Mm-hmm. And Miss Archie is the first person who taught me how to listen and to realize that every choice I make has an implication.
Yeah.
That even if I'm changing my behavior, that one slip up doesn't mean that all the good times like validate that. You still have to.
Doesn't define you.
You just can't, And so, and so I've been in contact with both of them through Facebook, which is interesting. And some are allowed more privilege of access than others, because of rules that are in place. But
how did you get Elizabeth into talking about the what they call it, stop, drop, and yoga, and then you got into teaching the class about the trauma and the Voice Project? How did that evolve in there for you? Because I think there's a couple of different things that are kind of it's a primitive environment in prison, but respect is a real thing in prison, and if you get respect in prison because of the way you carry yourself or what you can do for people, you can move easier in prison. And I'm thinking that when you did what you were doing, you're really helping a lot of people, and they probably appreciated that. But how did that evolve for you to get into that type where you were actually putting programs together?
So I actually grew up there, right?
Yeah,
and so
you literally did grow up there. Yeah.
You have the time in where people have also grown up with you, right? So when I was incarcerated, there was a large group of females who were incarcerated as juveniles all at the same time. And we all kind of grew up together. Stayed
close together as you're growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're still in contact and friends to this day. And it's been years, females do time a little bit different than males. We form family units. Maybe you feel uncomfortable with the family unit thing. We form connections. It's just a little different than male time. So like we break bread together, we celebrate each other's birthdays, holidays are a huge thing. So is the Super Bowl normally.
It's your own family unit. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a process of developing that and how large that is. That gives you clout in a place, right? Also, there's the fact that I was not the best behaved individual for years and years and years. And so that also gives you clout when someone knows that you will defend yourself, or when someone knows that you might have access to things at some point in time that you shouldn't have access to, even if you've changed your life. And I'll say it that way.
Did you have anything violent happen to you in a maximum security prison for yourself?
A couple things, but I'd rather not talk about that. They were always behind closed doors and they were never known. That's another thing, is that there were a few times that I was put in segregation under investigation and I never did say anything.
Yeah. Which is a big deal also in prison.
I think the outside world's like, well, why didn't you tell? And it's like, on the inside,
snitching's a big deal.
Yeah. And also it's your life, right? So that's a closed system and I'm not leaving there. I have to live with these people for the rest of my life. And the replications of what I do or don't do. And I didn't feel like it was my place to speak on something that I wasn't 100% involved with,
Yeah.
but also the implications of your own safety are a serious thing.
Right.
So, but all of those things end up giving your voice a little bit more clarity. I also have an innate ability of being able to navigate between different groups of people. So if
you blended well,
gang didn't get along with this gang, I still had friends with both gangs. And so it wasn't like I ever had to take sides or like affiliate with anybody. And so that gave me a unique ability too, to like move between groups of people. We called them cliques. We didn't really call them anything else on the inside. I think females.
Some people call them cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was that. But I think that, gosh, so the Voice Project actually came first, and there was a volunteer named Bree Luck that came in, and she actually started this. She came in and she had us do a poetry writing thing. And it was kind of like just space to get out of your head what's in your head. And then you could rip it up. Okay. And it was safe because your property is also subject to search at any point in time. And then anything that you write can be used against you. And anything that you have can be used against you on the inside. There's no privacy. Mail's not private. Your correspondence is not private. Anything you write is not private.
Telephone, everything. Yep.
Everything is recorded and can be used against you. So some people have these traumatic incidents, like the ones that I don't want to talk about, but need an outlet to have safe space to talk about them. And so that's what the Voice Project was at first. It was just a poetry writing group. That became, in the second or third ideation of it, a show. So we did slam spoken poetry, and there was a group of about 15 of us, and we decided to put it on as a show that was monologues of our poetry all together. Yeah. And then there was a movement component of it. So the group itself would you got to be the director of your own piece. And so you stood up and spoke, and they would enact whatever you wanted behind you. Okay. And that's kind of how it started to become like a more trauma-informed program. And then it was showcased in like a volunteer, like all the volunteers get honored once a year at that prison. And so it was like people from the department as well as volunteers got to see that show. And so that's kind of how it started. And then the next one, they redid Our Town, which is it's a famous play. Sure. They rewrote it in the prison town. And then another one they did was The Wiz. So I played the Wicked Witch in that one. No bad news. Horribly off key. And we didn't have any costumes appropriate, right? We took, she's wearing bondage stuff in The Wiz, right? So black trash bags and blew them up. Yeah. And they were like my skirt.
Yeah. So this is the witch, the trash bag witch.
Which, yeah. And then I had to die on stage and roll off backwards. And I did it. I'm such a klutz. And I jerked off the stage and then fell for real. Oh, it was horrible.
Oh God.
But it was fun. Yeah.
Well, that type of stuff is kind of like an escape, that is an escape of the mind. I know when, sports is kind of like that. I was thinking for the guys stuff, we play different sports and stuff and feel like you're something just normal that you would do on the outside. You didn't feel like you were, and that's something like you're talking about, Elizabeth, is freeing of the mind, that you're kind of having fun with doing something that it doesn't matter where you're at. It makes you feel normal.
Yeah. And I think you don't really, people always will you wake up and you're in prison? I said, well, I never woke up like that. I woke up and was like, oh, this is the next day of my life. What do I have to do today? Yeah. Where am I going? Yeah. How am I doing? So it's kind of scary how normal that environment becomes. And it kind of reminds me of my childhood a little bit, that you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And so now in my freedom, it's things like I forget I can open a window. Yeah. It's it's hot in here. Why don't you open a window? I said, oh, I forgot I could do that.
Well, getting the number of years that you had, what did it feel like as you were getting closer to the end? Because how did you know that the parole was going to become a possibility? How did that information get to you, and how did you know about it?
So I got transferred from the Virginia Correctional Center to Washington Correctional Center on a hardship move.
Okay.
Which my biological mother and my biological grandmother had cancer.
Okay.
And so they requested that I be moved. I did not get moved for about 4.5 years after that request was made. My grandmother passed.
Not 4.5 months, 4.5 years. Yeah.
When you're like a administrative move, it means you're in trouble or you've told on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
When you're that, they do it automatically.
Mm-hmm.
But when you request, they take their time.
Sure.
Yeah. So it was 4.5 years, and my grandmother passed away into the second year of that wait.
While you were waiting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did not get to reconnect with her fully out here. We did write letters, and she left me a suitcase of stuff. So when I came home, it was kind of monumental. Actually, both my grandmothers are sitting next to my dresser. Their urns are next to my dresser, and I still talk to them.
Wow.
They were my rocks.
Yeah.
When I was younger. So like whenever everything was crazy, I could call.
That was your touchstone.
So, but 4 years out, right? And I got transferred here. So I got transferred to Washington Correctional Center for Women. And it was actually, I want to say.
What did that feel like, Elizabeth? Because I mean, you basically grown up, in this prison, and getting moved as a prisoner is never good. But what did that feel like, moving from someplace you'd been with so long and had friends and established, this kinship of kind of like a family, that you were leaving?
Well, it was such a loss, right? So my friend had cancer at the time, and I had literally just shaved my head in support of her having cancer. Mm-hmm. So I had like a bald head, and they put me on a plane the next day, and I was like, should have waited a day.
Yeah, here we are.
For her, but still. And so I flew out here actually on a commercial flight.
Okay.
In regular plain clothes. They gave me a fake bag, carry-on bag, and a hoodie. And my hands were cuffed, but they were inside the pocket.
Yeah.
So it was a full commercial flight. So it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Oh, yeah. No, that's no Con Air in the federal system.
No. And I had 2 plainclothes marshals with me.
Okay.
So, I get here. And in Virginia, the lights never go out. So they'll dim when it's bedtime, but they never go out. So for first, I want to say 17, 18 years of my time, I had not been in the dark other than during Katrina when the lights went out. Mm-hmm. So I got here and I was exhausted, and they said, we're going to give you a room by yourself for 24 hours in receiving here in Washington State. And I said, thank you. What do you want to eat? They gave me like a cheese sandwich. And I fell asleep because I had I'd been up for like 90 days. I was pulling 2 jobs at the correctional center, but what I had left. Mm-hmm. And I crashed, and I woke up and had a full-fledged panic attack. It was dark. Yeah. I didn't know what was happening. I freaked out so bad. I got up, it was banging on the walls. I fell over the toilet. God. It was horrible. And then I realized where I was. They all came like rushing in and like opened the door, and we're like, are you okay? And I was like, I had very out of body experience when I first got there because it was dark for the first time. And I was probably sleep deprived, and it was just a totally new experience. Also going from like, I think I had mentioned before, I had been moved to a minimum security camp before I got transferred here. Yeah. And so it's going from like all this freedom to then complete lockdown again.
Was probably freaked you out.
Yeah, that too.
Well, I want to
get out of here.
Yeah.
I can't stay here.
Right.
It did get better though. And
well, I want to get into that, on how that second world came to you, because before we do, I just want to recognize our other show sponsor. Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group. I'm going to tell you, this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So you get there. Finally, you get there. You have a panic attack. It's all crazy. How is it entering this new prison?
Culture shock. That's the only thing I can say. So the Pacific Northwest is primarily Caucasian, where Virginia South is primarily African American.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very culture shock for me. It's funny how innately that changes the dynamics in the atmosphere of who's present and the culture that's around. I don't think I was fully aware until that moment of how different it was in different areas of this country.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I had been on the streets for years and gone around the country,
right.
It was in a different dynamic of just that life. But to come here and see this kind of environment, there's goods and bads. So the goods in Washington State are that there is more education opportunity. The housing is astronomically better than Virginia is. Access to your basic needs. They have a debtable system, so even if you don't have money, you can at a smaller cost get the things that you need, like hygiene items.
Okay.
Like that. They also have better gym equipment. They have flowers, huge open spaces. They have greenhouses, even in the maximum security.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. They have fundraisers here where they you pay a little bit more on some outside ordered food, and that extra goes to some nonprofit organization. So it's like a fundraiser, but then you get to have extra food. So I hadn't had pizza in like 18 years.
Wow.
And the first time they gave us a big Costco pizza fundraiser, and I cried.
Costco's got good pizza too.
Thank you. Shout out to Costco. It's very greasy, but it's good.
Yeah.
I think that's what you want from pizza, greasy. They also have like Christmas decorations. So we did have some in Virginia, but it was like paper and pencils and what you could create for the first couple of years, and they took it away. Out here, it was trees, it was lights, it was ornaments. It was like, it looks like Christmas threw up on the unit.
Yeah.
And it was also like games.
Yeah.
And it was like all these activities that people did together. And so I had to be reminded that like, just because it's better doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was astronomically different in lots of ways. And out here, I also didn't have any clout, actually, because nobody knew who I was.
Right. You're brand new. And you weren't an 18-year-old kid anymore.
No. I was not. I don't know how old I was, but yeah, it was in 2019. I got locked up in 2002, and I was transferred out here in 2019.
Okay, so in 2019, going back, because I can't remember what you were saying about this. So was it already in discussions that you could qualify and be up for a parole hearing? No.
So I didn't know I was eligible for parole. So the law passed in Virginia in 2020, I want to say. It might have been 21.
Okay.
I didn't know I was eligible for parole until 2 weeks before my first hearing. So there's a rule when you're on an interstate compact that the state that you go to is only required to give you the policies and procedures about their state, even though you're under the rules of another state.
Another state.
At least while you're on the inside, right?
Okay.
So I didn't know that and I didn't speak to anybody, because when you're on interstate compact, you also they just mark you as interstate compact and don't let people know where you are in the system. Because most people, it's administrative, right?
Right.
It's not hardship. Even if I was different, it's still those same things happen.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that the law had changed in the first place. And then I didn't know that I was eligible. So 2 weeks out, they call my counselor from Virginia and say, hey, she's got a hearing in 2 weeks. Make sure she's ready. And I'm like, a hearing for what? And she's like, my counselor didn't even know.
Wow.
Like, I don't know. We're going to go and just bring whatever you can bring. And I was like, okay.
That is crazy, Elizabeth. That is crazy nuts. They just call up, say they got a hearing. The counselor doesn't know anything about it. And you definitely don't know. 'Cause that's the last thing they do is tell you anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then I went and tried to like find out, because at this point in time I have family and I have friends,
Yeah.
and, you know, and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So I'm like, okay. So I go, and my first parole hearing is the parole interviewer.
Mm-hmm.
They have a parole examiner that does like an interview with you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a PCR, PSR, PSI. Yeah.
My whole
Pre-sentencing report. That's why I shouldn't talk in acronyms. Yeah.
It's a pre-sentencing report.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. But my whole first parole interview was him explaining the parole process to me.
Okay.
So he's like, well, this is what happens. And if you don't know, and I'm really thankful that he took the time to do that.
Sure.
Also, I also have like, inside I had this like fear that I would get out at like 60 and have no retirement.
Yeah.
I've never paid it. And so for some reason that came up in this conversation, and he explained like the whole like retirement benefit thing to me for the second half of our parole hearing, which I truly appreciate.
Wait, how does that work, Elizabeth? Do you actually? Yeah.
Yes, you have to have worked.
I never even contemplated that whole idea. If somebody's locked up for that amount of time, what does that mean?
Yeah. So when you're a juvenile, the presumption is you haven't worked and paid taxes,
right?
Which I hadn't. I had worked, but always under the table.
Sure.
Legal job.
Yeah.
Or under the table. And so you have to pay into Social Security X amount of time.
Okay.
And I believe it's 24 units. I can't exactly remember right now.
Yeah.
But if you are incarcerated as a child, and then when I was supposed to get out would have been older,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have had that time in.
To be able,
even at peace, if I was released, I wouldn't have necessarily had access to benefits. So then what do I do? Right? No experience, freshly released from prison, facing ageism, in the age of retirement. Like,
yeah,
that's a whole problem that people who are juveniles that are coming out at these older ages experience. You know, I'm 40 and I paid taxes for the first time this year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
It's something that people don't consider, right? So the parole investigator, he explained the parole system to me and why it was and how it came about and what the steps are. And then he explained retirement to me. And of course, I did not make parole. And then I call her my aunt. She's my cousin. Her name is Sue,
mm-hmm.
but I call her my aunt. So my aunt Sue was highly disappointed about this. And she contacted a former lawyer that had actually helped me in my original case, who is now a sitting judge. And he, of course, could not help because he is a sitting judge. Okay. But his former partner
was able to help. Okay.
Was able to help. So my aunt Sue did that. And he called me and we had a conversation. And he was so parole hearings normally cost $20,000 to $50,000. I do not have that kind of money at all. I don't think many people do, whether you're in the system or not. Just
throw down 20 to 50,000 for a hearing.
For a parole, for a maybe. And remember, it's 0.001%, maybe. He was gonna do my case for a sliding scale of like $3,000.
Okay.
As one of his help cases, mm-hmm. And he believed in me.
Almost like pro se. I mean, not pro se, but
pro bono.
Yeah, pro bono.
Pro bono. Yeah, it's okay. And then so he was like, "But your case fits with somebody I know better."
Okay.
Because I was a juvenile, because I got so much time, mm-hmm. Because I had trauma growing up, and because I continue to have trauma on the inside, mm-hmm. As a child, right? So he contacted Julie McConnell with the University of Richmond Law School, and they have a children's defense clinic.
Or defense, yeah, okay, clinic.
Yep, so it's a children's defense clinic, and what it is that people who are in law school partner with Julie and different systems.
I love that. It's kind of like an Innocence Project type deal. Okay.
It is. So they get real life experience while they're in law school. Usually they're seniors. In juvenile cases, they also started taking adult parole cases who were juveniles at the time of their sentence.
Okay.
they took my case pro bono after I had a call with Julie McConnell. And a student lawyer named Elliot DeMott and Julie McConnell are the reason I am sitting here in front of you right now, because they took my case and they took my very complicated life and made it linear and understandable paper, and then presented it in a PowerPoint that I was not allowed to go to. And then I had 2 interviews with the actual parole board because one of the members wanted to ask me additional questions. And I still maintain to this day that if the victim in my crime wanted me to be inside, I would wanted to stay inside.
You'd still be inside.
Yeah, because she went through something, you know, and I've been on that side of the board. And so I know how it feels to feel like your life is ripped out from underneath you because of somebody else's actions. And I can't, it's almost, it's a little sadistic.
Yeah.
That my life has turned around so much so, and I'm in this place of privilege and being on the show and a head researcher in the project that I research and all these things that I do now. And that was at the cost of the worst day of her life.
Yeah.
And I can't make up for that. So in anything that happens to me going forward, I want her to be considered legally.
Yeah.
Because she should have been considered in the first place. I can't change that, right?
Right.
But I can say that she needs to be considered. And that's exactly what I told them, that regardless of how you feel about me or how you like me, that and what I've done or not done with my life, I wasn't eligible for parole until 2 years before I made it. I didn't do all those things to be eligible for parole. I did them because that was my life. And that's how I wanted to live my life.
That's how you changed your life to live the way you wanted to live your life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we talked about before that, like, how you live on the inside is how a reflection of how you live on the outside.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a benefit to me that I just started living my life as if I wasn't on the inside.
Yep.
And then how that manifests, right? But they did ultimately grant me parole. Judge Dotson was the head of the parole board at the time. And he called me and we called my counselor and told my counselor, I have a few more questions for Ms. Shatswell. Can you arrange a meeting? And so he asked me about reentry plan and whatnot. I think we spoke for 45 minutes. And then ultimately he was like, I think we're going to give you an option.
What was your thought? I mean, I can't imagine, Elizabeth, after that.
And started crying.
I can't imagine.
I think what he told me was, this is the first time I've seen you at a loss of words. I was like, and my counselor also started crying.
I bet.
Yeah.
Then how fast were you released?
I made parole in March of 2003. I was released in July. So there is a requirement that you undergo some reentry training before you're released. Judge Dotson is now the head of DOC in Virginia. So he's, you know, I will forever appreciate that man for fighting.
What was it like, though, Elizabeth, like just packing up and walking out after 23 years? What did it feel like?
Surreal, right? So there's these places in prisons that you're not allowed to go into, and they're all the ones next to the doors, right? So there's it says all these do not just enter signs, you're out of bounds signs. There's all this barbed wire. And Kim Allness is the social worker who works at the prison, and we had become close. And so she walked me out the gate that morning and got to hug me for the first time and say goodbye and take some pictures. For me, it was a mixed bag of emotions. It was like so excited, so happy, but also like really, really sad because my family's there, you know, regardless of, it was the same as when I left Virginia, my family's there. And so here in Washington State, I worked a lot with the geriatric population who have life without and who are in early set ages of dementia and Parkinson's. And I've had a few people die. I was working.
Would that become a passion of yours?
Yes. We'll talk about the Hope team in a minute. But when you leave, you know you're not going to be able to come back in. And so it's like these people who are my grandmas or my sisters.
It's like you're leaving them on the battlefield.
Yeah. And so there's definitely a survivor's guilt that kind of goes with you. And I'm still working out how to deal with that and feel like I have the right to do something else in my life that's not connected to that. In some ways, that's a good thing because it facilitates the research and work that I do now. In some ways, it's a bad thing because I hold on to that.
Yeah.
And that's hard to hold on to. So it's a mixed bag.
So when you got out, I mean, you know, obviously so many things changed in 23 years, and I can't imagine all the different things you see. And you talked about getting motion sickness and the whole thing of, you know, all the choices and things that go on. But I think what's interesting about you, Elizabeth, is that you were experiencing all that, but you really pushed yourself right into your passion of what you were doing. And can you talk a little bit about that, as how you've kind of transitioned, but are really into, I would call it a passion project of what you love.
Yeah. So when I was on the inside, I had a woman who was my roommate, and she had early onset dementia. And as she relived memories from when she was a child, over and over every day, it caused her to have incontinence issues. And their response to that was to take her into isolation. I think I said this exactly the same way to you before, but I went on a rampage. I'm not supposed to say rampage in polite company. I'm supposed to say I went on a campaign, but it was a rampage. And the rampage was not with my fists, as it might have been at one point in time. It was with pen and paper and policy and my mouth talking.
Yeah.
And out of that inhumane moment and choice, lots of good things have happened. So the Hope team was started by myself and a woman named Jackie Ray and a nurse, and having a conversation about how can we better treat each other in community. Yeah. And I want to say it intersects with a program called FEPS, which is the Freedom Education Puget Sound Project.
Okay.
Because we were having this conversation first in that classroom.
Okay. About
borders and how women's health is treated at borders, specifically the Mexican-American border, and how there's a whole string of women called Maria that their bodies are found at the border, usually due to like healthcare inadequacies, childbirth issues or whatnot. So we were having that conversation in the classroom, and I was like, this sounds a lot like here. How do we deal with better care in liminal spaces? So liminal spaces is this like transition where laws don't necessarily cover, where policies don't necessarily cover. It happens to Indigenous folks. It happens to borders, people at borders. It happens to people who are incarcerated. It happens to people who are in elder care situations, geriatric care centers. It happens to people who are in mental health centers. So liminal spaces has become kind of like my passion about how do we give better care in these spaces that
help the people that fall into the gaps. Yep.
So these cracks, right? In the Washington Correctional Center for Women, how that manifested was the Hope Team. So the Hope Team is a joint partnership that started out of a peer support program. And first it was just women going down and being present and visiting with the women who were in the long-term medical unit. It became the facilitation of activities. So they have like game nights and movie nights. And I think they just had an Elvis luau because some of these women are obsessed with Elvis. You don't care if they don't remember their name. They remember
Elvis.
And they know like he is their best friend. One even told me that they served him a beer one time.
Okay.
I don't know if it's true or not. The fantastic story. And so we would start doing stuff like that. And so and that became like a horticulture program. And so it's like looking at these policies two ways. Like how can we look at the policy itself and how it's used for people who are experiencing illness? So they changed the reconstruction surgery policy, for example. If you were a female that was going through cancer and had a mastectomy, at one point in time, you were not eligible for reconstructive surgery. So if they cut anything off of you, they now have to give you the option to have that,
To have an option.
or to have a prosthetic, right? At the cost of the medical system.
Mm-hmm.
Some people may not agree with that, but it is, when you're sentenced to time, you're not sentenced to how you do time, you're sentenced to time itself.
Right.
And no one, I don't care what situation you're in, deserves to be treated less than human in medical situations.
Exactly.
I don't care where you are. And I don't care what you've done.
No.
Everyone deserves equal medical care. And that's kind of my stick now. Access to education, access to healthcare in an equal way, in an equal measure. The laws in most states state that you are not, if you are in a carceral situation, you are not under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health.
Mm.
And so the internal medical situation is a situation, and there's no real oversight. And so
no, there isn't, Elizabeth. And I think you and I were talking about this, but my dad was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and midway through his sentence, he had a colonoscopy. His colon was perforated. They'd sent him back, and they just refused to accept that there was anything wrong with him. They said he had the flu, and his body started to shut down. He had septic shock, and eventually the guys carried him up to the officer station and said, "I think he's dying." And they finally took him to the hospital, and it was so bad that they airlifted him to St. Louis, from Marion, Illinois to St. Louis. And he was in a coma for, I don't know, 2 weeks or whatever. But because of the situation, that wouldn't have happened on the outside. There would have been some other type of thing that happened before somebody gets just drug up to somebody, like thrown on them like a dog. And they say, "Oh, well, I guess we should do something." But, that's why I think what you're doing is it's not something that people talk about a lot. They don't think about it like healthcare inside the prison, or for an inmate, or somebody at the border, or those things you're talking about. And I think that's so unique and special of what you're doing, because we need a voice in those areas where people fall through the cracks. Because if you're not advocating for them, how do we advocate for them? And I think, the fact that you've experienced all the things that you've experienced also gives you a very strong voice to be the person who goes and talks about this too. It really does.
You had told me about your dad prior to this, but just every time I hear the story, my heart goes out to you. And it's just like I'm such a sap. It's such a hard thing to experience that, and just that helplessness and that lack of care.
Yeah.
Just to be able to breathe, to be able to move, to think.
Taking your freedom was one thing, not taking your health.
Yeah, I had one lady who was my roommate it's the same one that perpetuated me starting the Hope team. And she woke up in the middle of the night one night, and she tapped on the top bunk, because I was on the top bunk, and she was like, "Will you remind me what my name is when I forget?"
That's deep. And that's such a fear, it's like falling down a hole, knowing that you're falling down the hole, and it gets darker and darker, and all of a sudden you realize you're not going to remember your name. I can't imagine.
So you asked me earlier what it felt like when I left.
Yeah.
And all I could think was, who's going to tell her name? That was what was
right. Because you were looking out for her, and she was part of she was part of your family, and you were looking out for her.
Yeah. It's a lot,
It's a lot. And I think it's important too, Elizabeth. And I think people feel it when you talk about it. Prison is a horrible thing, but you do make relationships in prison. And when you leave prison, you go in as one person by yourself. But when you leave, it's different. It's the slapping of the high fives, the hugs, and people feel good for you. But you're leaving them behind. And so there is that dynamic of those two different things that happen all at once when you're leaving. And it's a very strange dynamic. It's a very strange dynamic that you only experience if you go through that wall and through the door and get released. And it's a weird thing.
There's nothing comparable out here. Even I think the closest thing would be maybe military life.
Yeah.
But there's nothing comparable to that.
That's why I was saying leaving somebody on the battlefield and you get to go home. There's something I don't know what that world is because I wasn't in the military, but I've seen the movies and it feels like that. I remember the guy that I was the closest to, we hugged in the hallway and he couldn't walk me out because he broke down to cry.
Yeah.
So I was leaving him and walking out to my family, and those two different things. I knew he had 2 more years, and it was going to change his whole life because what you do as a routine in prison, and that person leaves, like they vanish and they're not coming back. And I'm leaving and I'm going to freedom. So it's a weird thing. Everybody wants to be released, but you do leave something of yourself behind, which is fascinating.
You do, and then it's like, there's still moments now where it's like I get 2 things. I either get, you need to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
which is the bane of my existence. I don't need to slow down. I take care of myself, but I also have thought about this for 23 years.
Sure.
So maybe I think when people tell you to slow down, it's one thing. It's one thing we tell women all the time, right? You're doing too much.
Mm-hmm.
You're out of your lane. You need to slow down. It's one thing we tell women, but then also I think with me specifically, it's like people who care about me tell me this because of their own fears.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, a lot of times when people are telling you something, it is their own fears that they're laying on top of you. I'm curious, Elizabeth, all the things that you've gone through, and you've grown up through the prison system, and now you're doing something that you're passionate about and you're getting that back. What do you think is your biggest takeaway through all this that you've experienced?
So what I would tell other people, and I have told other people this, is that say yes. So do you know how many people told me no about like visiting my grandma's down there before? One person told me yes. That person that told me yes is now been promoted, and also the Hope team exists, and we're in a partnership with Washington State University and University of Puget Sound to do an ongoing research study doing well, I can't talk about all of it because we're an IRB, but what I can say is that we presented our preliminary scoping review of data that has been collected, so we know where to go from now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in hopes that IRB goes smoothly, so that way we can do actual focus groups and surveys on the inside to see what needs are actually needed by women in real time, and then how to implement that. I can say that our goal eventually is to be able to have geriatric training programs on the inside, so that women can take care of women on the inside and be trained correctly, and also have. Is
there a way, Elizabeth, for the people that are listening, that they could reach out to the Hope team? Is there a way for people to contribute or do anything with help?
Yeah, I can actually give you the information for a link in the future. I don't have.
I can put the link in the show notes. Yeah.
Yep, I will definitely get that to you. So we did just get the ability for the Hope team to have their own financial fund.
Okay.
So everything that is done is currently voluntary, right? And it's all incarcerated individuals and a few staff members on the inside that facilitate this work.
It's awesome.
And so, and then there's an outside group that is comprised of myself, Tasha Big Eagle, Corey Balcom, and Raven Weaver, and Tanya Ernst. And so those people, 3 of those people are professors and heads of departments at UPS, at University of Puget Sound, and the Washington University, the State University. And then Tasha is another justice impact individual who is currently in her master's/PhD program. And so she is my research partner.
That is awesome.
Yeah. She also did time in the same prison prior to all of these programs.
That's incredible.
Right. And she's Indigenous as well. So she comes at it with the Indigenous ideology of talking circles and models of care that are intergenerational, which really fits well with how.
No, you've got it. I didn't realize you had all that. You've got some great people doing good stuff.
At it from the geriatric and
I love it.
Dementia aspect. And then we have Kelly Sullivan, that is also a undergrad, and she's part of this project, and she does mostly dementia care and family unit models. So it's really a great team going forward. And we hope to expand that to include additional people at the University of Puget Sound over the summer, where I will be working as a research assistant there. But so it's come a long way.
No, I'm so proud of you, Elizabeth. You have it's total transformation. You've found a passion. You are doing great work. You've put a team together that's doing great work. And I just, it's a great.
There is a fund that is directly, it's controlled by Washington DOC,
Okay.
and it's at the prison. And how you do that is you would send a money order or a check to the care of the Hope team.
Okay.
And we can put the notes and the address in the.
We'll do it.
Yeah. There's also, and I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Plug that if you want to know more about not only the Hope team, but just what people are doing around the country to impact justice and impacted individuals, especially in regards to education, technology, and healthcare. I've just finished organizing a webinar series that's coming out in April. It is sponsored by Ithaca SNR and JSTOR, and it's called Second Chance Mentality, First Chance Reality.
Wow.
And it'll be all 4 panels. It'll be every Thursday in April. Will be moderated by Stacy Burnett, who is the senior manager of Ithaca SNR. And I will get you that information as well.
That is awesome. That's good stuff. I didn't know you had the webinar thing coming out. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for today. I mean, I love your story. I'm so glad I reached out to you and we connected. I want to give it a shout out while we're giving shout outs to Homestead Financial. Let me use this podcast room. If anybody needs home mortgage, they're in need of a home mortgage guy. It's Greg Aftiev. He will take care of you. He knows his stuff. Don't forget, I've got a book out there. It's on Amazon. It's called Nightmare Success. Likes on and shares and follows and subscriptions. Please do it. Leave a review on Apple. For some reason, it puts the show on steroids, and I love it when you guys take the time to do it. I know it's kind of a hassle, but it's a big deal. BrentCassidy.com is the website. It's with a TY, not a DY. I spell it wrong. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth to my people, stay strong. I'll do the same. Elizabeth, thanks so much for today. You are great. Just keep it going. I know I'm going to be seeing even more things out of you. Nightmare Success, in and out.